The drone hit the water trough with a splash and a fizz of sparks, startling the cows and sending Daisy blinking at the wreckage like it was just another Tuesday. I stood there, holding a feed wire in one hand and a wrench in the other, staring at the shattered plastic and twisted propeller blades now soaking in mud. That was the fifth drone this week. But this one had a heat signature scanner, a glinting camera lens, and a buzzing that reminded me far too much of surveillance runs in Kabul. That was the moment I stopped thinking like a farmer and started thinking like a military engineer again. 6 years ago, I left that world behind. I bought a plot of land in a quiet rural zone, grew vegetables, raised animals, installed solar, and thought I'd finally outrun the noise. That illusion died 3 weeks ago when the first drone buzzed over my barn with a blinking red light and a mounted camera. At first, I assumed it was some teenager's overpriced toy, but it came back. Again, then again, every morning, noon, dusk. It started hovering lower, circling my greenhouse, peeking through my workshop window. I knew surveillance. This wasn't random. Using a GPS triangulation trick I developed years ago, I tracked the drone's return path to its operator. And there she was, Karen Delaney, self-appointed queen of the Ridgepoint Hills HOA, living in a house she proudly called the Manor. When I confronted her, she stood on her porch in a bathrobe, sipping wine at 10 a.m., and smirked. "Community security," she said. "Your fencing materials are unapproved, Mr. Dalton." I told her to keep her tech off my land. She laughed and said, "Buy an island if you want privacy," then slammed the door. 2 days later, I got a laminated notice accusing me of interference with community operations. But the real offense came the next morning when she sent 2 drones. One hovered above my house, the other above my workshed right as I was testing an old blackout simulation chip. That was the final straw. I walked into my back shed, opened a dusty crate, and pulled out a piece of equipment I hadn't touched since my last deployment. A signal disruption unit, legally licensed under federal AG exemptions. I powered it up, locked onto the incoming drone frequencies, and waited. The first drone plummeted into the goat pen, where my billy goat head butted into the compost. The second spiraled down like a wounded wasp and crash-landed on the chicken coop. By 3 p.m., Karen was screaming outside my gate about $1,200 in damages and federal violations. I calmly held up my license and FAA documentation. She didn't read a word, just grabbed one of the wrecked drones and hissed, "You'll regret this." I thought it was over. But the next day, I got hit with an HOA citation threatening legal action for unauthorized defense equipment. That's when I knew. This wasn't about nosy surveillance. She was after my land. I reviewed the drone's memory cards. Most footage was just thermal scans of my property. But one had close-ups of my solar inverter schematics, details no HOA had business collecting. I called Marcus, a friend who works in county zoning. He hesitated, then admitted there was an anonymous rezoning proposal filed, one that flagged my land as inefficient and ideal for redevelopment. The source? Traced to a Ridgepoint Hills HOA consortium. That night, I reinforced my entire property. I set up decoy transmitters mocking military frequency signatures scattered around my farm. I upgraded the jammer with a phase cycle to scramble drone sensors without frying them. I installed new offline motion-triggered cameras with infrared backup. The next morning, I caught Karen at the property line with 2 guys in cheap polos pretending to be inspectors. I filmed them admitting they were hired by the HOA president. Then came the real shock, a brown package on my porch. No return label. Inside, a USB stick and a note. "Thought you'd want to see this. Be careful who you trust." The folder was titled HOA_Karen_internal. Emails, meeting notes, and memos. One outlined a vote to seize my land, complete with false complaints, bribes, and blacklists. Her signature was on every page. That was when it stopped being a drone feud and became a declaration of war. I set a trap. Using an old decoy drone with a signal lure, I mimicked sensitive data traffic. Sure enough, a sleek black quadcopter showed up, drawn in by the bait. I pulsed a calibrated sign allow enough to scramble, but not destroy. It crashed into a puddle by the scarecrow. Minutes later, Karen rolled up in her SUV, yelling about felony sabotage and homeland security. I reminded her about federal airspace laws and livestock safety ordinances. She didn't care. She never did. 2 days later, I was served court papers. She was suing me for sabotage, harassment, and destabilizing community morale. Her lawyer looked like he taught night classes in tax fraud. In court, she walked in like a beige-clad general, binder in hand. I walked in with drone wreckage, a jammer license, and a smile. I submitted the USB emails and Raul's forensic report confirming that her drones weren't just recording, they were emitting high-decibel pulses designed to disorient animals. That wasn't surveillance. That was attack tech. The judge requested a full FAA inquiry and ordered a 5-mile drone ban around my farm. Back home, I barely had time to sip coffee before 2 federal agents arrived at my gate. FAA Special Investigations. I showed them everything: logs, fragments, recordings. One agent muttered, "This just became federal." Turns out her drones had been probing my electrical systems, causing voltage spikes and relay malfunctions. That was a violation of national infrastructure protection laws. Word spread. Neighbors whispered. Karen's house grew darker each day. But the knockout blow came at the next emergency HOA meeting. Invited by residents this time, I walked in, dropped a flash drive on the table, and played the drone footage. Close-ups of my solar relay, pulse emitters triggering panic in my goats, and Karen's emails planning it all. The room went dead silent. One board member whispered, "We're all liable." Then Cheryl, a quiet board member, stood and exposed forged documents, fake fine approvals, and drone invoices signed before the board ever voted. The crowd erupted. Henry, a retired veteran, stood up and declared, "I vote to dissolve the HOA." Cheers followed. A vote was taken 87% in favor. Karen was stripped of power that night. When she tried to grab the flash drive, I caught her wrist and whispered, "There are 5 more. Try me." Her name hit the evening news. Footage leaked. Headlines read, "Drone Tyrant of Ridgepoint Hills." Internet forums shredded her reputation. When she tried to sue the station, they aired a second segment on misused HOA funds. FAA agents confirmed her drone mods were linked to a blacklisted surveillance vendor. She was under investigation for procurement fraud. And me? I got a letter from a defense contractor, an invitation to consult on rural drone countermeasures. Turns out, the Pentagon was impressed by what I built with farm scraps and retired gear. I agreed to consult remotely. I still had animals to tend. One afternoon, I saw her again, Corinne in a neon vest, directing traffic at a school event. No clipboard, no HOA badge, just a sunburn and a handheld sign that read "Slow." Our eyes met. She looked away. Back on the farm, peace finally settled in. No drones, no spies, just wind in the fields and the quiet hum of life. I'd learned something through it all. When tyrants take flight, sometimes you have to be the one who brings them down. Not with fists, with facts, precision, and the kind of silence that only comes after a storm. The drone hit the water trough with a splash and a fizz of sparks, startling the cows and sending Daisy blinking at the wreckage like it was just another Tuesday. I stood there, holding a feed wire in one hand and a wrench in the other, staring at the shattered plastic and twisted propeller blades now soaking in mud. That was the 5th drone this week. But this one had a heat signature scanner, a glinting camera lens, and a buzzing that reminded me far too much of surveillance runs in Kabul. That was the moment I stopped thinking like a farmer and started thinking like a military engineer again. 6 years ago, I left that world behind. I bought a plot of land in a quiet rural zone, grew vegetables, raised animals, installed solar, and thought I'd finally outrun the noise. That illusion died 3 weeks ago when the first drone buzzed over my barn with a blinking red light and a mounted camera.